and welcome to day 3 of the Ind AS Masterclass. So we'll start the day with a very relevant and important topic, revenue recognition. So before really we jump into the topic, let me step back and give you some perspective. Sandeep would have spoken about it in his session on day 1, but what has essentially happened in revenue recognition globally? Am I audible at the back? Perfect? Okay. So let me step back and let me take you to the Indian GAAP, okay, before talking about Ind AS or IFRS. When we talk about Indian GAAP, what are the general revenue recognition standards? Can anybody tell? Revenue recognition is standard, only the accounting standard number. AS7 and AS9. Yeah, these are the two primary revenue recognition standards. Apart from that, whether any other guidance is there? Any other guidance? Apart from this, some guidance is there in the guidance notes. There is a specific guidance note on real estate developers. Yeah, that is a compulsory guidance note for real estate developers. They follow it. Correct? Then there is a guidance note on oil and gas producing activities. Okay, that also determines a method of revenue recognition for those specified industries. Yeah, mining and oil and gas producing activities. Exactly. Then whether there is someone who is in the retail industry here. Retail industry, typically Pantaloon or Future Group or anything surrounding retail. There is a technical guide on retail revenue recognition, only for retail industries, a technical guide. Yeah. Then there is a technical guide on software revenue recognition. So we don't realize, but even under Indian GAAP, there is a lot of guidance on revenue recognition. Yeah. Then I come to IFRS. Okay, not Ind AS. I come to IFRS. IFRS, the way it stands today, the primary revenue recognition standard under IFRS is IAS 18. IAS 18 is nothing but the counterpart of AS9. Okay, general revenue recognition standard under IFRS. Then there is a standard called IAS 11. IAS 11 is nothing but the counterpart of AS7, construction contracts. Okay. Then there is a standard called IFRIC 15. IFRIC 15 is a very important standard. It deals with real estate revenue recognition. Okay. Then there is a standard called IFRIC 13. IFRIC 13 is a very limited scope standard. It deals with customer loyalty programs. A customer loyalty program whereby you deal with a Jet Airways, and as part of your current dealing, they give you some air miles which you can go and redeem in the future. That is a customer loyalty program. These are the 4 standards which are applicable as on today. Okay. Then what has happened under IFRS? Under IFRS, they have issued a new standard known as IFRS 15. Correct? That new standard on revenue recognition replaces all the existing standards, be it IAS 18 or IAS 11 or IFRIC 15 or IFRIC 13. It replaces all the revenue recognition. So as on day, those 4 standards are applicable. From 1st of January 2017, IFRS 15 will take over. Now what has happened under Ind AS? Okay. Under Ind AS, although globally IFRS 15 would be applicable from 2017, but under Ind AS, our Indian regulators have pre-adopted the standard. Yeah. So phase 1 companies who are preparing their financial statement under Ind AS for 2016-17, along with the comparative of 15-16, they will have to follow Ind AS from 15-16 only. Okay. So that is what Ind AS has done. So now, instead of studying IAS 18 or IAS 11, we are going to study Ind AS 115. That is the revenue recognition standard which is going to apply under Ind AS. Yeah. Now, again, I mean, when we go inside the standard, we'll see and we'll realize that the whole methodology has changed. Okay. If I talk about current IFRS is not very different from Indian GAAP. Okay, let me put it this way. It's not very different. If you read IAS 18, it's not very different from AS9, believe me. If you read IAS 11, it's not very different from AS7. Yeah. So even under IFRS, I mean, a lot of effort is involved in understanding the standard. One myth I'll remove right away. Okay. The common myth is that, oh, the new revenue recognition standard has come, which means my top line is going to go topsy-turvy. It may not happen. It may happen that you apply the new standard and eventually you come to an answer which is not very different from what you are currently doing. It may happen. Okay. as part of Ind AS transition effort, what we are going to do is, we are just going to apply the provisions of the standard and see the impact. Yeah. So please remove that myth from the mind that your top line may heavily change. It might change, it might not. Yeah. Very difficult to imagine in the case of a retail company who's selling retail products for cash, their life is going to change. Very hard to imagine, right? And it's absolutely a given fact that companies who enter into long-term contracts, be it long-term software contract or long-term service contract or real estate contract, their life is going to change heavily. That is for sure. Okay. So with this, we'll step into the new revenue recognition standard. So what is the objective of the standard? The objective of the standard is to give you a detailed understanding of the revenue recognition transaction. The name of the standard is revenue from contracts with customers. Okay, Ind AS 115, the name is revenue from contracts with customers. So all the contracts with the customers are in the scope of the standard. Now, as we say about IAS 18 or AS 9, which we say is the general revenue recognition standard, this is also the general revenue recognition standard. Okay. When I say general revenue recognition standard, it means that where any specific standard deals with a specific transaction, you go and refer that standard first. Okay. A typical example is leasing. Let's say that you gave a property on lease. Okay. Now, be it an operating lease or be it a finance lease, and how you are going to record an lease income, that will be determined by IAS 17, the standard on leases. Okay, because a specific standard is going to deal with that specific transaction, leasing. Yeah. So where any specific standard is there, you go and follow that specific standard. Where no specific standard is there, you come and follow Ind AS 115. Now, which are the areas where specific standards are there? It's there in leasing. So any lease contract, IAS 17. If you are in the insurance industry, yeah, if you are there in the insurance industry, there is this standard called insurance contract, Ind AS 104. The name is Ind AS 104. It's the counterpart of IFRS 4. Yeah, insurance contract. Then, of course, I mean, if you are dealing with financial instruments, then the standard on financial instruments will apply, which you would have studied last Saturday. Yeah. Then, of course, certain non-monetary exchanges which we are going to deal with inside the standard, that how scope exception apply to them, we'll see this. Yeah. So primarily to understand, this is again the general revenue recognition standard. It will apply to all the contracts with the customers in the ordinary activity of the business. Okay, some very important scope exceptions. Now, very important scope exception when I say, one of the very good scope exceptions they have given is collaborative arrangement. Now, collaborative arrangement, I'll tell you what essentially happens. I'll give you an example, okay? And there was no guidance in the previous IFRS on collaborative arrangement, so there was always an anomaly on what you can do. A typical collaborative arrangements are very common in pharma industry. Okay, I'll give you an example. Let's say that Dr. Reddy Laboratories, okay, Dr. Reddy Laboratories come up with an idea whereby they see that they can do a lot of research and development work in the area of AIDS, and maybe they can come out with a pill which can cure AIDS to an extent, let's say. Okay. Now, these collaborative arrangements are very common in pharma industry, because what happens that the moment Dr. Reddy Laboratories will realize that they have to do this research and development, the cost of research and development is going to be very significant. Okay. So it commonly happens that a pharma industry in particular as an individual do not want to make that expenditure by themselves. So what they will do is, they will go to Ranbaxy, or they will go to Sun Pharma, or they will go to Torrent Pharma. They will make a collaborative arrangement with some 2-3 pharma companies. Let's say that they went to Sun Pharma and they said that I have this idea, I have done this much research, and I am absolutely sure that if I do further research and development, then maybe we can come up something in the area of AIDS. Sun Pharma said that, okay, perfect. You go ahead and do this research and development. Yeah, it's a collaborative arrangement between you and me. If you develop something, then we will see how to share revenue from the sale of those pills. But in the meantime, whatever research and development expenditure you incur, I will reimburse you 10% of that. Yeah, this is a typical collaborative arrangement. It is very common in pharma industry. It is also very common in oil and gas industry, whereby Reliance says that maybe I can do this digging in this area and maybe I can find oil, and they will go to a BT, whereby they will say that you also reimburse something. Now guidance in these collaborative arrangements guidance for these collaborative arrangement was crystal clear under US GAAP always. Okay, but there was no such guidance under IFRS or even under Indian GAAP. Okay, so what companies typically used to argue earlier is that whatever reimbursement of expenditure I am getting from, let's say, somebody like a pharma industry, somebody like a Sun Pharma, why cannot be it my revenue? I will recognize it total as a revenue. Yeah. Although you had always a sense that this is not their revenue or this is not their primary revenue generating activity, but there was no surrounding literature to stop them from doing it. Now there is a specific literature collaborative arrangement, scope exception. The scope exception on collaborative arrangement says that in collaborative arrangements also, a pharma company or any company can record revenue only when they are dealing with their customers. Okay? You have to define that who is your customer. Whether Sun Pharma is your customer, very hard to define it. But if you can define that he is a customer, then maybe yes, whatever he is paying you is your revenue, otherwise not. Clear? So you'll have to see. So it's very difficult. If you have structured the contract, I mean, just going out of the way, I'll explain you. If you have structured the contract in a way whereby it specifically says that he will only reimburse the cost, it's very difficult to define him as a customer. But whereby the contract structure says that you provide this research and development services for me, and for these services I will pay you something, then maybe you can say that he is my customer. Yes. 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 It's not your revenue. Yes. Okay. Now I come to the core principle, the most important core principle, the 5-step methodology. So you would be seeing the point of time since when this revenue recognition standard has come, everyone is talking about this 5-step methodology. For any revenue to be recognized, this 5-step methodology has to be fulfilled. Okay, and that's what we are going to do for the next 2 hours. We are going to spend time on this 5-step methodology only. Yeah. So, what is the 5-step methodology? The 5-step methodology is step 1, identify the contract with the customer. Okay, and we'll come to each step one by one, but step 1 is identifying the contract with the customer. Step 2 is identify the performance obligation in the contract. Okay, step 3 is determine the total transaction price of the contract. Step 4 is allocate the transaction price to the performance obligation. Okay, and step 5 is recognize revenue when each performance obligation is satisfied. So very simple. Now, before we really get into the details of each and every step, let me take an example and let's discuss how this 5-step methodology generally is going to apply. I mean, a man of common parlance, what is going to understand from this 5-step methodology? Let me take an example. I'll take an example of an IT industry, a software company. Okay. A software company enters into a contract with the customer to supply a customer relationship management software. Along with that, they say that I will provide a post-contract customer support of 5 years. A very common contract in software industry. Okay. I have entered into this contract. Okay. And the total transaction price is $1 million. Simple. Okay. So, step 1, identifying the contract with the customer. The written contract with the customer or the written PO with the customer can be the contract. Yeah, we'll see whether it will sustain as a contract under the definition of the standard or not, but that is the contract. That is what we understand today. The contract is there. Okay. Step 2, identifying the performance obligation. Now tell me, what is the performance obligation here? So maintenance is one, and one more, supply of software. So 2 performance obligations is there. Supply of the software and maintenance of the software. 2 performance obligations. Determine the transaction price. When I say determine the transaction price means total transaction price. So $1 million is my total transaction price, right? Then I come to step 4, allocate the transaction price to the performance obligation. So I have 2 performance obligations, supply of the software, which more often than not is going to get delivered to the customer on day 1, and then maintenance will go on for the period of 5 years. So using some methodology, and we will see what that methodology is, but using some methodology, I will break down the $1 million between the supply of the software and the maintenance part, the 2 performance obligations. That is what is step 4, allocate the transaction price to the performance obligation. Yeah. So let's say I applied some methodology, and applying that methodology, I allocated 800K to supply of software and 200K to maintenance. Then I come to step 5, recognize revenue when each performance obligation is satisfied. Yeah. which means that on the day I supplied the software, I will recognize 800K, and maintenance which is going on for a period of 5 years, I will record 200K over the period of 5 years. Essentially, this is the 5-step methodology. This is the way we are going to apply this 5-step methodology. Now, of course, I mean, when we apply this, there are a lot of rules which they have built in here, which we are going to study now. Now, step 1, what is the contract? Identify the contract. A contract is any agreement between two or more parties which creates enforceable rights and obligations. Now, I'll tell you two important things in contract. First is, when I say that identify the contract with the customer, the contract, it's not that a contract should always be a written contract. Okay, a contract can be a written contract also, and a contract can be an oral contract also. Yeah, a contract is something which creates enforceable rights and obligation between the two parties. Now, and it's also not that a contract, it typically has to be a 10-page contract between the two parties. Now, between a buyer and the seller, you tell me what is the enforceable rights and obligation of the buyer and the seller. The enforceable right and obligation of the seller is, his obligation is to supply the goods and his right is to receive the money. Right? That is what is the rights and obligation of the seller is. Everyone agrees with me? His rights and obligation is only two. His right is to receive the money from the other party, and his obligation is to supply the goods. Now, when I come to the other side, from the perspective of the buyer, what is his right and obligation? Obligation to make the payment and right to receive the goods. Yeah? Any document which brings out these two rights and obligation of the buyer and the seller is a contract. Any document. It can be an invoice, it can be a PO, it can be a contract, it can be any piece of paper which brings out the rights and the obligation of the buyer and the seller, which is legally enforceable, is a contract.
That means it should be written.
So that's the way law applies in India. I mean, when we went back and checked, even an oral contract can be sued in the court of law. It's that other thing that you are going to have a hell of a time in justifying to the court authorities that it's a contract. But under the Indian law, under the Indian Contracts Act, a contract can be an oral contract also, and it can be a written contract also.
As per mercantile law definition given under 1972 Act, that it should be written one, and it should be, the party must be specified that the particular guidelines written. Difference is particularly given in arrangement and a contract.
Under Sale of Goods Act.
Under mercantile Act.
I don't know. I mean, under the Indian contract, under the Contracts Act 1934 or something, we understand it can be oral or written. But whatever, I am laying down the general principle. The general principle is any document which lays down the rights and the obligation and which can be enforceable in the court of law is a contract. Yeah. So we just need to ensure that we enter into a contract with the customer. Okay, whether these conditions are getting fulfilled. If these conditions are getting fulfilled, step 1 is complete. Then some other guidelines which they give. I mean, if you are not very clear whether a enforceable rights and obligation is getting created, we can just check these 3 indicators. Check second, third, and fourth indicator. You leave the first one right now. First one is a unique one. We'll come to the first one. But second, third, and fourth indicator. As long as the right to sell goods or right to transfer goods and services and the payment terms can be identified in a document, it's good enough a contract. Okay? If it is approved by both the parties and the parties are committed to their obligation, it's a contract. Okay? If the document has commercial substance, it's for sure a contract. Net, again I come back to the same words, that as long as the enforceable rights and obligations are there of both the parties and the document is legally enforceable, it's a contract. Okay? Now, I come to something unique. Collection of consideration is probable. Now, what they have done is, under the old regime, even under the Indian GAAP or even under the old IFRS, you will see, at the time when you used to make the sale of the goods, at that point of time, you always used to evaluate whether the consideration of, or whether the collection of the consideration is probable or not. Right? That was the point of time when you used to evaluate that whether collection of the consideration is probable or not, and where you used to determine that the collection of consideration is uncertain, there you never used to record any revenue until that uncertainty was removed. Right? Now you will make that evaluation right on day 1. Okay? right on day one when you are entering into the contract with the customer, you will make this collectability assessment, whether the collection of the consideration is probable or not. Where the collection of the consideration is not probable, you will not record any revenue because you will conclude that a valid contract doesn't exist only. Okay, and what is the assumption behind step 1? The assumption behind step 1 is, it's really bizarre for you to enter into the contract where you yourself believe that collection of consideration is uncertain on day 1. Right? So they say that when the collection of consideration is uncertain or the collection of consideration is not probable, it's as good a case that a contract only doesn't exist and you cannot record any revenue until the point of time that uncertainty is removed. Clear? It was always the situation. There is no change. There is no change. Okay? On what? Probable consideration, I mean, on the day when you are entering into the contract with the customer for a sale of goods, like any gap, even today, whatever revenue recognition guideline you would be following, you would be making an assessment that when you are making the sale transaction, whether collection of consideration is probable or not. Right? If the collection of consideration is not probable, a valid contract doesn't exist and you cannot record a revenue until the point of time that uncertainty is removed. Simple. There is no threshold here that more than 50% or more than 60%. You need to make your own assessment whether the collection of consideration is probable, and that assessment you are going to make depending on the intent and the ability of the customer to pay. How I assess whether the collection of consideration is probable or not? I check the intent and the ability and the credit worthiness of the customer. Intent and ability means whether he has the intent to pay. Ability means whether he has the strong enough credit worthiness to pay. These are the two evaluations which I will make on day 1.
But the time that you enter into the contract, there is the right to receive the goods and the obligation to make the payment. Otherwise, why would you enter into the contract?
That is exactly the assumption which they have made, and they say that it will not make any commercial sense for you to enter into the contract where you doubt the collectibility only.
Yeah.
Exactly, and that is what they say, that in that case you don't even assume that a contract is fair with the customer until the point of time that uncertainty is removed. Right? It's all very logical, right? Everyone understood what is a contract? So this we have discussed. Okay, combining contracts. Now, very relevant topic. Now, these are some of the changes which we are going to study from the erstwhile Indian gap. The concept of combining contracts. Let me take an example and explain you the concept of combining contracts. So, what we are going to do, combining contract is a concept whereby I enter into one or more contracts with the same customer at or near the same point of time. Now, I am making a simple evaluation that should I account for these two contracts as two contracts separately, or whether should I club these two contracts and then see it together as one contract. That is the evaluation which I am trying to make over here. Okay, and we'll see how accounting will impact further. As we go further into the study material, we'll see how the accounting and revenue recognition will get impacted, but it's a very important evaluation. So let me take an example, and then we together will evaluate all the three criteria which needs to be fulfilled here. Okay? I'll again take an example. I'll take an example of software. Okay? I entered into one contract on 1st of January 2015 for delivery of software. Okay? The value of this contract is $10 million. Then again I entered into the contract on 15th of January 2015 Then I entered into another contract on 15th of January 2015. This contract I entered for implementation of the software. Okay? The value of this contract was $5 million. Okay? Now, simple point of evaluation, whether these two contracts are with the same customer. That is most important. Let's say with A Limited. Now, simple point of evaluation. Should I combine these two contracts and account it as one contract, or should I account for these two contracts separately? Okay. I'll tell you where the difference will come. Our life is going to be very much easier if I account for these two contracts separately. Because what will happen? If I account for these two contracts separately, when I deliver the software to the customer, I will account for $10 million as the revenue. Okay. Then when I do the implementation, I will account $5 million as the revenue. Okay. No complication at all. But when I combine the contract, okay, when I combine the contract, then I will see that these two elements are just one contract for me. Okay. So I will again apply the 5-step methodology. One contract. Okay. One contract. Now identify the performance obligation in that one contract. I have two performance obligations. Identify the transaction price of the total contract, $15 million. Allocate the transaction price to the different performance obligation, which means I have to do fair valuation exercise, which is a complicated exercise. We'll see that. But I have to do the fair valuation exercise. So $15 million I will allocate to supply of software and to implementation. There the answer can change. It may happen that the fair value might be only 8 million here and 7 here. Correct? And then I will record revenue. So answer is going to change, and that's why I say it's a very important evaluation. Yeah? If it would have been Indian GAAP, your answer would have been that there is no concept like this combining contract, and you would have just gone ahead and taken 10 million here and 5 million here. That is not going to happen here in India at 115.
So, but what is the fair value in this contract? Because this is what we have agreed, 10 million and 5 million. Then why are these fair values?
So you have touched a very important chord, and anyways I would have explained you the entire history of fair value. Okay. I would have explained later, but let me explain now. So we all understood how life can change and why this is a relevant analysis to do. Now I will answer his question. He is asking that when I have agreed with the customer, with the same customer $5 million in the contract, then what is the relevance of fair value? Why to do a fair value? Let me step back and let me give you the brief background of fair valuation. That why at all this concept is there in revenue recognition. Okay. This concept of fair valuation in revenue recognition, and this type of arrangement is very commonly known as a multiple element arrangement. Okay, multiple performance obligation arrangement. Now, why fair valuation is relevant? Somewhere in the 1990s, okay, when the SEC was when the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, was doing their own review of all the listed US companies, one very common practice they found. Okay, the practice was, let's say that you are a Hewlett Packard. Okay, as part of Hewlett Packard, you supply servers or hardware to the customer, and then you provide the post-contract support of the same hardware to the customer. Okay, so it's very easy for you. Let's say that I am standing on 31st December year end. Okay. I entered into a contract with the customer. I entered into a contract with the customer, and the customer told me that, look, I want some 10 pieces of servers from you, servers, plus I want 5 years of post-contract customer support, which is maintenance of these servers from you. Okay. HP said, very good, I will supply you these servers and I will supply you 5 years of TCS, and my total price is $20 million, which I am going to charge. Everyone is with me till here? $20 million is the total price I am going to charge. The customer said, very good, let's go ahead. Then what HP said is, HP said that, HP told to the customer that, look, you are any which way indifferent, you are going to pay $20 million, can you do me a favor? Let's break this transaction into two, and let's enter into two different transactions. Okay, I'll make one contract only for supply of servers, where I will put the value as $19 million, and I will make another contract for post-contract customer support, where I will put the value of $1 million. The customer said, yeah, I am indifferent. I mean, any which way it affects my cash flow, but we'll manage. But I am indifferent. Let's do this. Okay? They entered into two different contracts, 19 million one, 1 million one. Okay? Now what happened? If there is no guidance in the area of multiple element arrangement or no such guidance, what HP will end up doing? They will record $19 million on the supply of the servers only, and they will record $1 million on the supply of TCS. Ultimately, it may very well happen that their TCS service will go on a loss. Yeah, but that will come in the future years. Their problem for 31st December target meeting or budget meeting or whatever was there was solved. Very prevalent practice it was there in the US. Okay, and to curb this practice, the US accounting standard setup came out with the standard for the first time. It was a landmark standard. It was known as EITF 0021. Okay, any US GAAP folk you will talk about, he will really talk about this standard for hours, 0021. That was the first standard ever came, which was a multiple element arrangement accounting. That was the first standard which laid down the guidance that if you are doing this multiple element arrangement, then whatever you are writing in the contract as the contract value, I am going to disregard the same. Okay, I am going to do a fair valuation exercise, or the customer will have to do a fair, the seller will have to do a fair valuation exercise, and whatever is the fair value, that only you can record. Okay, now if I apply that standard, then I will disregarding your contract value.
But in that case, suppose first I have taken one contract from you to supply, and then second contract for implementation or service, whatever it may be. But then I disregarded that I don't want to maintain your server. I am up to supply only. My contract price is 10, but if you have evaluated at 8, then there will be a differential in that.
So you were saying that this contract subsequently got cancelled.
Yeah.
Yeah, then whatever you have received at that point of time, you will record. That is absolutely fine. I mean,
Then your fair valuation will be disregarded again.
So see, if this piece gets cancelled at all, which means the $1 million got cancelled, okay, then what you received actually for the server is $19 million, okay, then that $19 million will get recorded. I am with you. Fair valuation means what? Fair valuation doesn't mean that you are going to record revenue which is over $20 million. Revenue, so you will record $20 million. But that breakage of $20 million between these two elements is going to be on a fair value basis.
Yes, both the contracts are live.
In case?
Both the contracts stand live.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if the contract gets cancelled or subsequently anything happens, it's just a subsequent contract modification which you will take care at that point of time. If this piece gets cancelled and he will say that I will not pay you $1 million, okay, well and good, you record $19 million. Correct? This is the history of fair valuation. This is the concept of fair valuation. Everyone got it? Yeah, and everyone with me, I mean, it's very, yes.
Supposing there are two different contracts, one for hardware, one for services.
Yes.
Hardware is 10 lakhs, services 5 lakhs.
Sorry, hardware?
Hardware is 10 lakhs and services 5 lakhs.
Yes.
Composite contract is 12 lakhs.
Yes.
I could negotiate a better price.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Understanding is that I am negotiating on the service part.
Okay.
That is the understanding between the seller and the buyer.
Absolutely.
How do we account it for in both the books?
We'll come to that. We'll come to that, how to allocate the total transaction price to the individual performance obligation. It very clearly says, I mean, when we'll come to that portion, you will see, it very clearly says that you are contending that you only provided the discount on the service portion. If you can very well establish that from your other contracts, okay, so 10 plus 5, 15 million. You were saying that you negotiated the contract for 12 million. The 3 million of the discount you only passed on to the services. That is the understanding. You just demonstrated by way of other service contracts where you only provide the services that this is the standalone price at which I provide the service. And then it is very difficult for you to. Then it is very difficult. Then it is very difficult. So it has got nothing to do with the buyer. It has only got to do with the seller. So,
For the buyer, this won't apply?
for the buyer, this won't apply.
This won't apply.
No, for the buyer,
This is
won't
only
apply.
revenue
It's only from the perspective of the seller.
Okay.
Okay. So now coming back to this, everyone understood the concept of fair valuation? Yeah, and everyone agrees it's a logical concept to follow accounting per se, although it's going to make your life difficult because then you will contend that I am going to levy VAT or value-added taxes on $19 million, I am going to levy service taxes on $1 million. At any given point of time, the VAT return will not tie up to what I record as a product revenue in my financial accounting book. That complication is going to be there. I mean, I'm sorry to say, but there is no alternative surrounding it. That complication is going to be there, and maybe these reconciliations you will have to keep out of the books. But accounting consequences or accounting answers can very well be different from those, what you record in the taxes. Okay. So now coming back to my example. So my example was that on 1st of January 2015, software $10 million, on 15th of January 2015, implementation services of $5 million. Okay. My first point of evaluation is whether these two contracts should be combined and then accounted together, or whether these can be accounted as two different contracts. For these, three different criteria are there. These are all AND conditions. If all these conditions are fulfilled, then I will account it as one contract, otherwise I will account it as two different contracts. So first condition is whether the contracts are negotiated as a single commercial package. So whether the contracts are negotiated as a single commercial package. This is a very simple criteria to deal with. Here you just need to see that how the negotiation between the buyer and the seller happened. Means how the seller submitted his proposal to the buyer. Whether the seller submitted his proposal to the buyer in a way where he always said that I am going to supply software plus implementation to you, or whether the proposal was also submitted for these two components separately. Okay. Oh, we only see one thing here, and very logically, that when I submitted my proposal to the buyer and I am entering into two different contracts, whether the buyer had the option to only take the software and implementation from somewhere else, or only take the implementation from me and software from somewhere else, is that the way proposal was submitted, or whether the customer was never given an option only. I submitted one composite proposal of software plus implementation. Okay, if that is the case, condition 1 will be fulfilled. Consideration in one contract depends on the other contract. Again, very logical. Consideration in one contract depends on another contract means that how you have arranged your payment in the contract. Whether your payment in the contract is in a manner which says that I will pay you total $15 million only once you complete implementation, otherwise I will not pay you anything, or the contract very clearly says that I will pay you $10 million for software, I will pay you $5 million for implementation, even if you don't do the implementation, okay, I'm not going to take back the software part from you. Means the consideration of one element is not dependent on the other element, right? And the third, goods or services are a single performance obligation. Goods or service are a single performance obligation means that is it the case that in the normal course of business, considering the business practices of the seller, he always sells these two together? Is it the case? Because it's very unusual that you will provide software and somebody else will come and do the implementation. So whether you always give software plus implementation together, or whether you sell these two services separately, that is what you are going to see. If these three conditions are fulfilled, you will account it as a combined contract, otherwise you will account it separately. This is the concept of combining contracts. Understood, everyone? Okay, go through this example.